Hello, everybody. Welcome to Chapter 17, Nutrition in the Growing Years. We are going to do a pretty abbreviated version of this chapter. If you go on to take life cycle nutrition, you'll get a lot more detail about this. But for our purposes in human nutrition, we're going to briefly describe the normal growth and development during infancy, childhood, and adolescence. And think about the effect of nutrition on growth and development. We're also going to compare the calorie and nutrient needs of infants, children, and adolescents. Spoiler alert, that varies greatly and is very dependent on the rate of growth happening at the time. We're going to talk a little more detail about infant nutrition and compare the nutritional qualities of human milk and infant formula. We're going to explain the rationale from the standpoint of both nutrition and physical development for the delay in feeding infant solid foods until 4 to 6 months of age. We're going to go over the recommended rate and sequence for introducing solid foods into an infant's diet, and discuss the factors that affect the food intake of infants and adolescents, and describe the potential nutrition-related problems that may occur during the growing years and their impact on future health. So to get us started, we're going to take a little bit closer look at growth. These graphs might be a little bit confusing at first. The main point is that boys and girls grow differently, and you really start to see that difference in the teen years, the adolescent years. So this is where males and females start to differentiate, and we start to see that males generally are taller and gain more weight, especially muscle mass, than girls. And that's happening during puberty. The other thing you're going to notice if you're wondering why this is dropping, it's not that they're getting shorter or smaller or decreasing in growth. This is talking about the growth rate. So the first year of life, the growth rate is extremely high. So relative to that, it slows down quite a bit. And we really see a dip in these early school years. This is especially for weight. And then we kind of experience this rebound where we start gaining weight pretty rapidly again, kind of getting into the preteen years. And then during puberty, when we have that last final growth spurt, the rate of weight gain is quite high. And again, for boys, this is where they generally start to be larger than girls, which is a fairly common gender difference. For changes in height, again, we have this huge growth in the first year of life, and then it slows down relative to that considerably. And for boys during puberty, we have this increase again where they're starting to reach their full adult height during puberty. For boys, this growth spurt tends to be longer than girls, which is why at the end of puberty, boys are on average taller than girls are. We have to track physical growth differently in children and adolescents than we do in adults. We do that by tracking growth on growth charts. I'm going to show you an example of that in the next few slides. And when we talk about growth, we usually talk about percentiles, and that allows us to compare within groups. So we use growth charts separate, boys versus girls, and we have different types of growth charts relative to age for most of them. Um, the growth charts are really important to let us know if there might be something going on. We expect most healthy kids and adolescents to kind of stay within the same percentile curve. If they fall off the curve, it looks like growth isn't happening. We can take in other information and have a failure to thrive diagnosis. This is very serious, and it means that there could be undernutrition or some type of physiological problem that's impeding growth. We could use them in the other spectrum and think about if weight is coming on more than expected, especially over the age of 2, where we might have to start being concerned about overweight and obesity. But again, those growth charts are really valuable in helping us to assess growth. So here is an example. They actually look a little bit different than this if you print them off of the Center for Disease Control or World Health Organization, but this gives you a general sense. So this here would be an example of a growth chart that's showing stature, which would be like length or height relative to age. So the way these are filled out is you take the person's age and you plot it relative to their stature. You could choose the units of both inches or centimeters. And then every time they come in for a visit, you plot that again. So you can see here for the green and yellow dots, if this were a person or the yellow was a person and the green was a person, they're staying within the same percentile. So if you followed that all the way up, they're at the 50th percentile. So it means that on average, if you took 100 kids that are this age and this gender, about 50 of them would be taller and about 50 of them would be shorter. So that would be considered very normal stature. When you start to see deviations, this is where it might be a red flag and you might need more investigation. So for this case, the yellow person was growing along the 50th percentile, and then they started to fall off and go down. So by the time they're 8 years old, they're in the 5th percentile. So that's a significant drop, and you would want to find out if there was something serious going on that that person might not be growing normally. Here's other examples. Again, if you consider each kind of symbol as a person, if we take the green person, they're staying very consistent on the 50th percentile, which is perfectly normal. If you look at this purple person, they were also right around the 50th percentile, but around age 6, they started going up. And by the time they're 8 years old, they're in the 95th percentile. This might be a case where, you know, as their weight relative to their age starts to increase across the percentiles, it would indicate that they might be gaining weight too rapidly, and we'd have to be worried about overweight or obesity. And the red is the exact opposite. They're also starting out, you know, right here in the middle, but they're dropping, and so they are not gaining weight appropriately. So if you know, these can be kind of confusing when you first look at them. Remember, we're looking for people to stay sort of on the same percentile line, and we're concerned if they start to fall above or below that too dramatically. And we also worry about the extremes. You know, the low percentiles, especially the 5th or below, can indicate growth is not where it should be. And for older children above the age of 2, for weight, we start to worry about, you know, when you get up to the 85th, 90, and 95th percentile, that their weight might be increasing too much. So this is one of your objectives, is to think about macronutrient needs. So what are the energy needs? For an infant, calories per pound is the absolute highest because they are growing so incredibly fast. So for a baby in their first year of life, they need about 50 calories for every pound of body weight. And that number will start to decrease because the growth rate decreases. So a young toddler aged 1 to 3 is going to need about 43 calories per pound. By the time you get to age 15, it drops even more. And again, this is reflective of the incredible growth rate that happens the first year of life. Similar story for protein. Maybe think about an adult. So for most of us, we need zero point 0.8 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight. An infant is almost double that because of all the growth and development that's happening. And adolescence is going to be more than adult, especially because they are growing and putting on muscle mass, especially in their growth spurt. Um, and those numbers are reflective of that. So just so you kind of know, an infant is considered a newborn to 1 year. A toddler is considered 1 to 3 years old. A preschooler would be 3 to 5. We've kind of got, that middle school age. We usually consider adolescence the teen years. And then an adult would be over the age of 18, although the growth charts actually go up to 20 years old. The macronutrient needs of infants is pretty different than the rest of the age groups. Babies need a ton of fat. It makes up about 40 to 55% of their total calories. So it'd be very odd that an adult would eat that much fat. And the higher needs are because your brain actually contains a lot of fat, and there's so much brain developing happening in infancy that they really need all of that fat in their diet. So if you kind of think about what we tell adults, where we have to be worried about fat and we're worried about heart disease, we don't worry about that for young children, especially newborns and infants and even up to 2 years old. We want to make sure that there's enough fat in the diet. Carbohydrates, especially the first year in life, it's mostly coming from either breast milk or formula. The main type of carbohydrate is lactose. That is also the type of carbohydrate in dairy products. Um, at first carbs are going to be a little bit lower because fat is so high, but as we get older, we get close to about 50% of our calories from carbohydrates, which would even be in the recommendation um, lines for an adult. The first year of life, we don't have fiber. Our digestive systems aren't quite ready for that, and that's actually not even an important need. But after age 1, when we're eating more kind of normal foods, we want to be thinking about having fiber for our carbohydrates and choosing whole grains whenever possible. Micronutrient needs, we're not going to go over all of them, just kind of the more unusual ones. Vitamin K is that fat-soluble vitamin that we can make with the bacteria in our large intestine. When we are born, we don't have bacteria in our large intestine yet, so we don't make our own vitamin K. So we actually give a vitamin K shot shortly after birth. And remember, we need that vitamin K to help our blood clot, so it's very important. Sometimes we think about giving infants fluoride, especially if the water doesn't have fluoride in it or if they're not getting a lot of water. That's important for normal tooth development. Um, Breastfed babies often need vitamin D. Vitamin D is not very high in breast milk, and we're usually pretty careful about putting our babies in the sun. So you can get liquid vitamin D supplements for breastfed babies. All infants are born with good iron stores that are meant to last for the first 4 to 6 months of life. But if mom was iron deficient during pregnancy, that usually means that those stores weren't allowed to build up. So we really have to be careful about iron in infants. If they're being fed formula, there'll be iron in the formula, but breastfed babies might have to be careful about that, and they'll need a good iron source after about 4 to 6 months of age, and they need a supplement if there was other concerns. Zinc and B12, again, this would be for a breastfed baby. If mom is low in these nutrients, and we'd most often see that in vegetarians, especially if they're not having meat or fish. So her breast milk would be low in those vitamins, and so they might need supplementation to ensure good nutrition for the baby through the breast milk. Breast milk is pretty amazing stuff. So when I say human milk, I'm referring to breast milk. As a mother is breastfeeding her baby, um, We know that at the beginning, when the baby first starts eating, the foremilk, the milk that comes out at the beginning, is very high in carbohydrate. Just like for adults, that's a quick, readily available energy source that would be needed for the baby to have energy. As the mom breastfeeds longer towards the end of the feed, we have hind milk. You can even see that the color is different. That's because at the end, the breast milk is higher in fat. And that's a good thing. That's a little bit slower to digest, and it will hopefully keep your infant fuller a little bit longer. That's one of the many amazing things about breast milk, that it changes as the infant is feeding. In terms of kind of comparing human milk versus formula, babies, especially when they're first born, eat a lot. They can't eat a lot at once, so 2 to 3 ounces, and they're going to digest that pretty quickly. So they need to be fed about every 2 to 4 hours. If you didn't know this, that does include around the clock. So that's why new moms are sort of notorious for not getting a lot of sleep. We certainly monitor their growth very carefully, but we also monitor their diapers. So if they're feeding properly, they are going to have lots and lots of soiled diapers. It's probably kind of annoying, but it's a good thing. It's letting us know that they're getting lots of nutrition that they really need. Um, Not everybody can breastfeed. It is recommended, but if it's not possible, you can prepare bottles using infant formula. Usually people buy powdered formula they have to mix with water. You have to be very careful to mix that correctly. You also have to be careful about food safety. You can refrigerate formula for about a day. Breast milk, if mom is pumping it, if she can't always be there to breastfeed her baby, she can pump it into a bottle, and you can freeze that to be used later for about 6 months. If formula or breast milk has been in the bottle and the infant's mouth has touched it, it now has all that bacteria on it. So anything that was left over actually has to be thrown away. And this last little message here that was covered up is saying don't microwave. A lot of babies sometimes prefer a little bit warmer milk or formula, but if you microwave it, you might get hot spots, and you don't want to burn the baby's mouth, so you do have to be careful about that. Now, you might be wondering, at what point do we have cow's milk? That's what most humans consume, or soy milk, or almond milk, or something like that. In fact, human milk or breast milk is quite a bit different. It is very specifically designed physiologically to be exactly what a baby needs. And if you look at the head-to-head comparison, you can see that it actually is very different from cow's milk. It's lower in protein, and that's because an infant's digestive system isn't able to digest all those proteins very well. In fact, if you gave an infant cow's milk, all that protein could be very damaging. The proteins are very big. They kind of get through the digestive system inappropriately, and they can also lead to more allergies. So no cow's milk until age 1, and that's one of the reasons why we have to hold off. You can see that human milk is very high in fat, and that's reflective of the high need of fat in that first year of life. You can see that lactose is the main carbohydrate. It's very easy for an infant to break down. You can see that cow's milk has a lot more minerals. Calcium and phosphorus are both minerals, and that mineral content would be too high for an infant. That also could be very damaging to their digestive system. So again, an important message, only breast milk or formula the first year of life. You can't introduce cow's milk until 1 year old. Now, at some point, you have to move beyond just breast milk or cows or breast milk and formula. And this picture is showing a family feeding their infant what we call solid foods. That often happens around 6 months old, sometimes a little younger if it's a well-developed infant. But we usually say about 6 months old, we can start adding in other things. They do start to have a nutritional need for other things, especially a breastfed baby will start to need foods that provide a little bit of iron. We can also get some, vitamin A and um, zinc and other things through solid foods. At this age, they're also physiologically capable. Their digestive system is more developed. They're able to sit up so they're not going to choke as easily. Um, they can control their head better so they're not flopping around, which could also cause choking if they weren't ready to do that. The extrusion reflux is basically when they stick their tongue out and they don't like things in their mouths. Around 6 months, that weakens, so you can put a spoon in their mouth, and they do have the ability to use their tongue and swallow. And they also have the ability to chew food. Before that, they just don't have those coordination and those types of skills. So you really do want to wait till they're about 6 months old. Tips for adding solids. That's my daughter a long, long time ago. She's 10 years old now. But I took all kinds of pictures of her. I was fascinated with feeding her foods and trying to be very, very healthy. Um, I don't know what kind of mom I am, but I promise you that this is pretty normal. Feeding is a skill. They're not very good at it at first. It ends up in their ears and up their nose and all over their face. Um, it's a messy process, but they're learning all kinds of things. They're learning how to pick food up, bring it to their face, how to chew. They're learning how to communicate. They'll start to tell you, not with words, but with facial expressions and actions. Um, what they like and don't like. They will tell you when they're hungry and when they're full, again with their actions more than their words. You do want to try and start off on a strong foot and introduce healthy foods. You can see some green and some orange in this picture. So she was probably getting sweet potatoes or carrots. I can't remember. And I believe that was probably peas, which she does not like anymore, but we could get her to eat them when she was small. Some other tips, um, both the rate and sequence for solid foods. We usually do one food at a time, and it's good to kind of make sure that they're not going to have an allergic reaction to anything. That's why you want to take it a little slow. Here in the United States, we usually start with some type of grain cereal. Rice is a common one because it's very rare to have an allergy to rice. It's pretty bland too. And they do fortify it with iron, so especially for those breastfed babies, they can get a good iron source. We've kind of progressed. We have more than just rice out there now. And this kind of a cultural thing. There's lots of cultures who don't have this type of cereal. They just kind of go to normal table food that they mash up for an infant. But again, you do want to be thinking about iron for some infants. We do suggest avoiding honey. It can have a type of bacteria in it that could be very dangerous. So that's not good for infants. Cow's milk, again, avoid till age 1. Um, Nuts is an interesting one. So when I had my kids, we were told to avoid nuts because of allergies. The recommendation now is to really work closely with your doctor, and they're finding that early introduction of nuts can actually prevent allergies, but you do have to be careful about that and work with your doctor. These are really popular now, these little pouches. They're basically glorified applesauce, but they are convenient. You don't need a spoon or anything, and just kind of different ways to introduce nutrition. This little girl, it looks like, is drinking out of a bottle. You do want to start to think about getting rid of the bottle between ages 1 and 2, and teaching them how to use a cup instead. It is usually better um, from a nutrition or a developmental standpoint, excuse me, to use cups instead of bottles. You also have to be really careful about using bottles at night, especially if it's got milk in it. That can really rot their teeth, having that carbohydrate in their mouth all night long. I kind of made this point earlier, but they're learning how to feed themselves. That's an important skill. So the more we can let them do that and let them hold the spoon, even though it's messy, that is a good practice. So after age 1, we start to think of children as toddlers as they toddle around and are usually walking around age 1. Toddlers as eaters are kind of similar to toddlers as toddlers. They can be a bit finicky. They're not always known for their pleasing personalities at this age. One of the problems is their appetite. Because the growth rate starts to slow down compared to infancy, they're not as hungry. So it can be really hard to kind of get them to sit down and eat. And sometimes we forget that their portion size is really quite small. You want to be thinking about when, what, and how much to serve. Kids this age really do better with a structure. You really want to present healthy foods to them. In terms of how much, they probably need less than you might think. And we really want to be careful about not forcing kids to eat. When they're done, you have to let them be done, and you don't want to kind of force overfeed them. That can kind of lead into bad habits later on. Food preferences can be kind of tricky. A lot of kids, um, they'd prefer sweet foods. I think this is not my daughter. I think this is ice cream. My daughter would still love it if I gave her ice cream for every meal. We tend to like sweet and salty foods even at a very young age. And it's okay to have, treats once in a while. That's all part of good eating, but to really try and expose them to a lot of fruits and vegetables, and hopefully that will stick with them throughout their life. This group is known for often being picky. They're starting to have a personality and be opinionated. So often you really have to be a good role model and keep trying to get them to try new foods. Food jags is when they just want to eat the same few foods over and over and over. So trying to get excited about other foods and let them be involved in the process can really help. Um, solve some of these problems. Um, Having said all that, some kids are kind of easy and they'll be good eaters, and some kids can be really, really challenging, and you might have to get some extra help. We're kind of quickly moving along here. We'll talk a little bit about teenagers. We didn't do too much in the school age. Teenagers are an interesting group. You're not quite an adult, but you certainly are intelligent and have some independence at this age. We know that teens are usually very influenced by their peers. A lot of times, body image is starting to come into play where traditionally, boys want to be kind of big and muscular, and girls want to have this sort of perfect ideal frame. And sometimes that can set up for dangerous practices. A lot of times, if a teenager's into sports, they might be very concerned about athletics and physical performance. Sometimes that can be motivating and a good thing, but that can also sometimes lead to unhealthy habits and behaviors if there's not good support and education. So helping teens eat more nutrition foods can actually be quite challenging. Um, because of all those barriers that I talked about. But because they are having their growth spurt, it's really important to try and promote healthy habits. Lots of potential nutrition related problems. I'm going to talk about all of these. For babies, GERD or reflux disease is actually the same as we see in adults, where the acid from the stomach can come up and burn the esophagus. It's really painful and it can make it difficult to feed a baby. It happens because that lower esophageal sphincter isn't always developed, and they actually can give medication for that to reduce the acid. Milk allergy, if the baby develops some type of allergy to the protein in either the formula, or sometimes if mom's eating a lot of dairy products and breastfeeding, the infant might not tolerate that very well. In that case, mom has to cut out milk from her diet. If she's breastfeeding, or a formula-fed infant might have to switch and do a soy-based formula. Constipation can happen if there's not good hydration, or if the baby is getting some type of iron or iron supplement. You really have to make sure that they are staying hydrated in that case. Diarrhea can happen easily with any type of bacterial or viral infection, and that can cause dehydration, so you have to be really careful about that. Babies get lots of ear infections, it seems like, which can really make them not be very hungry, so you have to make sure you're monitoring their growth. And dental caries or cavities can happen, and that usually is a problem, again, with the bottles, using the bottle too long and taking the bottle to bed. As we get a little older, we still worry about cavities. We have to be careful about the sugar in the diet and make sure that we have good fluoride in our water and our toothpaste. We start to see obesity in the older years that we can identify through the growth charts. So making sure that kids stay active and eat their fruits and vegetables and whole grains is really important. Hyperactivity will start to be diagnosed as a child gets older. There's lots of reasons for that. Some might be linked to diet, although probably not as much as people sometimes think. Bone health is especially important for teenage girls. They're accruing a lot of their bone density, so you have to make sure they're getting all those bone building nutrients, the calcium, the D, the K, the magnesium, the potassium. And lastly, teenage pregnancy is a very kind of delicate time physiologically if that does happen, because you have both growth and pregnancy happening. So you really have to make sure they're getting good nutrition if possible. Do kids need vitamins? I bet a lot of you took a vitamin. The answer is generally no. There's a few exceptions. All infants get the vitamin K. We already mentioned that. In some cases, iron and D, that's usually for a breastfed baby. Fluoride, especially if the water supply isn't fluoridated. B12, if mom is breastfeeding and maybe doesn't get a lot of B12 in her own diet. But you really want to evaluate all this before you just start giving out supplements. This is true for all ages. A supplement cannot replace a healthy diet. And I just threw out the ingredient list for the vitamin that was popular when I was a kid. This is probably not healthy, right? We kind of think of supplements as always being healthy, but this is full of sugar and artificial dyes, which has been linked to hyperactivity. So you really want to try and get as much nutrition from your food as possible. And that is it for this. Thank you for your attention. And we are getting close to the end of the semester.